We now come to the final component of the SICHAH. This time the focus is upon the commentary that Rashi has to Bamidbar 21:8, a commentary that precedes his commentary to Nachash HaNechoshet. And the Rebbe in the SICHAH will now address question 4, the issue that part of the commentary does not relate to Bamidbar 21:8, but rather should have been attached to the following pasuk 21:9. In his commentary to the words Kol HaNashuch, Rashi writes, Afilu kelev o chamor noshecho, that even if the individual suffered a bite from a kelev or a chamor, haya nizok, would come to harm, mit navaneh v'holech, the consequences of which the individual would deteriorate to the point of death. The implied question to which Rashi is responding to is the change in wording between Pasuk 8, the instructions, and Pasuk 9, the actual implementation of those instructions. In Pasuk 8, the wording is V'haya kol hanashuch. Anybody who had been bitten was to look at the replica of the saraf and would live. Whereas in Pasuk 9, the text is focused specifically upon those who had been bitten by the attacking snakes, im noshach hanachash et ish, any individual who had been bitten by the snake, v'hibit et nachash hanachoshet, by gazing at the copper nachash v'chai, that individual would live. So that Rashi addresses the textual anomaly by broadening the impact and effects of the nachash to heal bites from other sources, whereas Pasuk 9 addresses the bite received from the swarm of snakes that had attacked the camp. Rashi then goes on to address a second anomaly, namely the change of wording between Pasuk 8, the instructions to Moshe, where we have the Reish Aleph Hey Shoresh V'ra'a Oto, while in Pasuk 9 the wording is V'hibit El Nachash HaNechoshet. Hibit implies looking at something with a great deal of concentration, and based upon the distinction that Rashi has made that Pasuk 9 refers to the snake bite, where venom is injected into the individual, and unless treated immediately, that individual is basically walking dead, a greater degree of concentration was required, whereas Pasuk 8, dealing with the bite of other animals, the impact of the bite is less severe, and the individual would die only if the bite is left untreated. Hence the use of the Reish Aleph Hey Shoresh, one involving less concentration and focus. The question to which Rashi addresses only arises when we come to Pasuk 9, and on the assumption that Rashi addresses issues regarding the Pasuk under discussion, not issues that will arise when one comes to information located elsewhere in later Pasukim. This segment of the commentary should have been attached to Pasuk 9 rather than to Pasuk 8. And therefore, given the fact that each and every commentary of Rashi is precise, is well thought through, one can conclude that including this information into his commentary to Pasuk 8, Kol HaNashuch, it becomes a preamble to Nachash Nechoshet. To understand how this entire segment is a necessary preamble to his commentary to Nachash Nechoshet, we will now look at the third component of this Rashi, where Rashi moves away from the Pshuta Shel Mikra and introduces a Midrashic observation recorded in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, in which Rashi makes a fundamental change with respect to the healing powers of Moshe's Nachash HaNechoshet, namely that the recovery from the snake bite was not affected by merely gazing at the replica of the snake. In other words, although the text suggests otherwise, there was no magical powers within the replica that brought the individual back from almost certain death. In the words of Rashi, V'amru Rabboteinu, the Gemara records a view presented by the Rabbanim of the Tanaic period, who ask rhetorically, V'chi Nachash Meimit or Mechaye, was it the Nachash that caused death or life? Referring to the Nachash that Moshe had made. In of itself, it did not have the ability to control life or death based upon whether one looked at or stared at it, as a pshat reading of the text would suggest. Ela, however, Bizman Shahayu Yisrael Mistaklim Klape Maila, by looking at this Nachash Nechoshet attached to a very high pole, the people were forced to look upwards, away from the physicality of what was happening below, towards the heavens, And as a general rule, when one wishes to communicate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one looks upwards towards the sky as if one is directing one's thoughts to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the words of Rashi, "Umishabedin et libam la'avihim shebashamayim," they would subject their hearts, their emotions, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, symbolically represented by the heavens. And then Hayom Mitrapeim, their reconnection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu would affect through prayer the healing process. V'im lav, however, if they decided not to physically look at the Nachash HaNechoshet, not reconnect themselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then Hayom Nimokim, they would waste away on account of the physical bite they had received from the original attack. In other words, Rashi is making a fundamental change in the understanding of Pasuk 9, that V'hibit el Nachash HaNechoshet v'chai did not come about merely by staring at the Nachash HaNechoshet as if it had some magical powers to heal, but rather that the replica of the Nachash was merely a tool through which the nation could focus their thoughts in prayer towards God. The upshot of this fundamental change is that while it might be argued that there was a need for the replica to be in the shape of a Nachash in order to link the refuah process to the suffering that came about as a result of their lack of faith, by the same token, what this replica was made from, whether from nechoshet, from silver, from iron, or wood, would have no bearing on the end result. And this fundamental change becomes the preamble to the commentary that Rashi has to Nachash Nechoshet, and in doing so we will see why Rashi places the commentary not attached to Pasuk 9, but rather attached to Pasuk 8. And furthermore, Rashi will be responding to an implied question that arises from his understanding of his thesis, that when God tells Moshe to create an image of a saraf, he actually told him to make a Nachash saraf, with the word Nachash not recorded by the text.